This is Lesson 27.2, Stalin's Soviet Union. How did Stalin and the Communist Party build a totalitarian state in the Soviet Union? College Board Topic 8.6, Fascism and Totalitarianism. Explain the factors that led to the development of fascist and totalitarian regimes in the aftermath of World War I. Explain the consequences of Stalin's economic policies and totalitarian rule in the Soviet Union. After Lenin's death, Stalin undertook a centralized program of rapid economic modernization, often with severe repercussions for the population. Stalin's economic modernization of the Soviet Union came at a high price, including the liquidation of the Kulaks, the land-owning peasantry, and other perceived enemies of the state, devastating famine in the Ukraine, purges of political rivals, and ultimately the creation of an oppressive political system. The place, the USSR, Soviet Union. Time frame, about 1921 to 1938. Key people of Stalin's Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin, of course, and Vladimir Lenin. He hasn't quite gone away yet. The Kulaks and Leon Trotsky. Key concepts of Stalin's Soviet Union. 5-year plans. The new economic policy, the NEP, which he wanted to get rid of. The Gulags, the Great Purges, and collectivization. Intro. What we see happening in the big picture. Stalin took over from Vladimir Lenin, who died in 1924. Stalin turned the Soviet Union into a harsh, thoroughly communist authoritarian state. And Stalin launched a series of highly ambitious 5-year plans starting in 1928. He wanted to transform the Russian people into a new socialist people. Stalin had several important means to this end: propaganda, deep sacrifices by the people, harsh repression, including the Great Purges of 1936 and 1938, executions in gulags, and rewards for loyalty. From Lenin to Stalin, what are the big things to know? Vladimir Lenin was politically and economically more flexible than Stalin. The country was in an absolute political and economic shambles when the Bolsheviks took over, and Lenin instituted the New Economic Policy, or NEP, and it ran from 1921 to 1928. It was enormously successful in improving the economic situation in Russia, and it had several key features. Number one, the peasants, who had the numbers to truly challenge the new government's authority, could sell their surplus crops for a profit. Number two, small businesses were allowed, just petty capitalism, nothing big. Number three, heavy industry would still be state-run. Number four, Lenin relaxed censorship and repression. And number five, he went for less centralized control of the other Soviet republics. However, Lenin died from a stroke in 1924 without a successor, leaving an intense power struggle behind. Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky were rivals for control of the party. Some things to know about Leon Trotsky. He was more sophisticated, more polished, more educated, and more eloquent than Stalin. Trotsky had played huge, vital roles in planning the Bolshevik takeover and in the Red Army's victory in the Civil War. He argued for what he called permanent revolution. Permanent revolution said that Russia needed to be part of a European or even worldwide socialist revolution. Many argued that this made Russia just another country to Trotsky. It also created the fear that Russia would get into more conflicts with capitalist countries. Things to know about Joseph Stalin. He was a good organizer. He knew how to win friends and influence people. And he used his office as General Secretary of the party's Central Committee to make and reward allies in the Communist Party. He argued for socialism in one country. He said that Russia could build socialism on its own without the help of the rest of the world. By any reasonable measure, Trotsky, with his eloquence, his education, and his intelligence, should have been the one to take over from Vladimir Lenin. Stalin's message, however, prevailed within the Communist Party. Stalin was put in charge of the Soviet Union. Trotsky was exiled from the country. Eventually, in the year 1940, Trotsky would be tracked down and killed by Russian agents in Mexico. He was attacked with an ice axe, and he died of his wound within 24 hours. The 5-year plans. The Party Congress ratified Stalin's consolidation of power in the year 1927, and Stalin was eager to get rid of Lenin's NEP. He wanted to unleash a second revolution for numerous reasons. Stalin and his people were more committed to this idea of pure communism than Lenin had been. Stalin found the NEP's emerging small private traders, independent artisans, and property-owning peasants to be inconsistent with true communism. Communist leaders were deeply concerned that property-owning peasants, the Kulaks, would try to restore conservative capitalism. Consistent with their ideology, communist leaders believed that there was an enemy class of rural landowners out there who were holding onto enormous sums of money. Collectivization would free up that money, which could then be used to fund modernization. All of this was largely an urban myth, but it gave Stalin an enemy around which he could build a distracting propaganda campaign. Hence the first of Stalin's eventual 3 5-year plans. Its main features: number 1, the collectivization of agriculture. It forced consolidation of individual peasant farms into state-controlled agricultural factories. Number 2, harsh repression of the Kulaks, those peasants who had benefited most from Lenin's NEP. Number 3, propaganda cast the Kulaks as the new enemies of progress. It's been argued that collectivization of agriculture was a complete disaster because millions of people starved. However, if you're in the Communist Party and you don't care about all that, it was a win for the Communist Party. They effectively neutralized the peasants as a political threat. Interestingly, peasants were given the right to cultivate family plots to supplement their food supply. By 1938, these family plots amounted to 4% of the cultivated land. And this 4% was actually growing 22% of all of Russia's food. The real spectacular gains of the first 5-year plan were in the urban manufacturing sector. Industrial output grew by 250% over the course of 5 years. The 5-year plan was also about transforming the people of Russia into a socialist people. Communist leaders feared gradual regression back into capitalism, and they wanted to completely abolish all private traders, artisans, and landowners. Petty, small-time capitalism was still capitalism to Stalin. Stalinist terror and the Great Purges. For the Bolsheviks, the Stalinists, the Communists, and any totalitarian regime, terror is state policy. A totalitarian state always needs enemies, real or imagined, against which it can misdirect the attention of the people. Terror sends a warning that everyone serves the party and its leader with total devotion if they want to live. In the year 1934, Stalin most likely had his second-in-command, Sergei Kirov, killed. Stalin publicly blamed, quote, fascist agents for it. He took advantage of the mass hysteria among party members and the people. Stalin used the death of Kirov as a pretext for the Great Purges. He purged the Communist Party of any suspected traitors. He had his own secret police to carry out his orders. He solidified his own control of the party through the purges. And he made highly publicized spectacles of major trials. He used torture to get false confessions, and he also used false evidence in court. No one's position within the party was safe, whether it was new, old, high, or low. Stalin had many willing collaborators. The effects of the Great Purges. No one really knows how many people were killed in these Great Purges. At least 6 million were arrested, and 1 to 2 million were executed or sent to Gulags in Siberia, from which they never returned. The economy was seriously weakened. Stalin got a new state apparatus stuffed with a new generation of 1.5 million new Soviet-educated party members. These kinds of graduates had largely gone to technical schools, which had trained them for government management and industrial production. These new party members would run the Soviet Union into the 1980s.